Okay, so in this video we are going to continue sculpting on our Dishonored style character bust from the last video. I wasn't too happy with the simple bust we made in that video, so we're going to work on creating a new one. So I'm also going to take this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about cloth sculpting, as well as cover a few more advanced features such as masking and face sets. Just know in advance that I'm currently using the beta version of Blender 2.9. I was trying to use some of the more advanced features in Blender 2.83, but I was running into a lot of stability issues and some crashing. So if you're going to follow along with some of the stuff we do in this video, I'd strongly recommend downloading 2.9. If that's the current release or more advanced, then you should be good. Okay, let's jump into the video. Okay, so to start out, I'm just going to create a new cube and I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'll bring it down and I'll just start doing some very simple modeling to get the basic shape of the bust that I'm going for. Now, the overall look of the shirt that I want to create is something of a turtleneck or a military all-weather shirt. It's best, as always, to gather up as much reference as you can beforehand. So I'm going to be keeping the 3D modeling very simple. I'll create something for the collar and then I'll extrude the cube on the sides to create the basic shape of the shoulders. I'd also like to thank everybody for the feedback you left on the previous video. Also, I'd like to ask if there are other topics you want me to cover, and if you are interested in seeing me cover other software such as ZBrush and Substance Painter. So please feel free to leave a comment below. So this is basically going to cover all the modeling I'm going to do. So now with this basic shape, I'll take it over to Sculpt mode and I'll go to my remesh settings in the top toolbar, and I'm going to set my remesh voxel size to something around 0.07. Once I have that, I'm just going to hit remesh. And now with my tablet, I'm going to just start smoothing out the edges of our basic shape. Now I quickly noticed that I was not sculpting in symmetry, so I'm just going to turn our X symmetry on in the top toolbar, and to correct what error I did make, I'm just going to go into our symmetry settings in our sculpting tools under symmetry, and you'll see at the bottom it says Symmetrize from -X to +X, and I'm just going to hit Symmetrize, and now it's corrected that issue. Okay, so from here I'll start using our grab brush and standard brush to move everything into place. I'm only concerned with getting the basic proportions with some consideration of the anatomy of our character underneath the cloth. I'll continually hit remesh a few more times as I'm working to give myself a fresh coat of topology to work with. If I come to a spot where I find that our head sculpt is clipping through our bust, I'm just going to use our grab brush to cover that up a little bit. From here, I'll just continue to smooth it out a tiny bit, and then we'll move on to our Dynatopo. Okay, that looks good. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Simplify brush. I'm going to turn Dynatopo on. Let's go to our Dynatopo settings, and they are still set at constant detail with a resolution of 50, so that'll work. And as soon as I make any adjustments in the viewport, it goes to smooth shading, which I have set in my Dynatopo settings here. You can turn that on and off here, but that works for me. And from here I'm just going to brush over with the Simplify brush. Now, as I explained in the last video, our Simplify brush will not have any additive or subtractive changes to the geometry, but it will simply adapt all of our geometry to whatever we have set in our Dynatopo settings. So here it is creating a whole lot denser geometry for us. Now, don't pay much attention to the faceting pattern that might appear when you're doing this. This isn't actually indicative of the amount of geometry you have, because if we go into wireframe, you'll be able to see that the geometry is a lot denser now. From here, I'm going to take the Draw Sharp brush and I'm going to start cutting in a seam around the base of our collar. So I created a little seam line around the base of the collar, and I'll just press P to select our pinch brush, and I'm just going to tighten that up a little bit. All right, now you can see that crease that I kind of cut in there that was pretty shaky, and it doesn't look that great. Now, one thing that you can do when you're doing a seam or a crease or something like this is to turn on stabilize stroke, and I'll show you how to do that. So I still have the draw sharp brush selected, and I'm going to go to my brush settings, and under stroke I'm going to hit the checkbox for stabilize stroke. Now, for ZBrush users, you'll find that this is very similar to your lazy mouse feature, as where when you start making a stroke, it creates a delay, a transition delay between when that stroke actually appears on your mesh, so that you have an input delay that'll essentially help to smooth out your brush stroke. Now, let me show how that works. So I'm going to turn off stabilize stroke, and you'll see that with my regular draw sharp brush, if I just go to the back here, I could just draw around it and scribble and get a bunch of little zigzag lines going. Okay, it looks like a mess. Now say I want a smoother stroke, and I turn on stabilize stroke. Now you'll see when I drag this out and I start moving really fast with a lot of velocity, that input delay is still going to help smooth out and basically create a nice curve and smooth stroke to my brushes. So we'll use stabilize stroke in this instance, just using around the top of the collar. First, I'm just going to lightly smooth out this collar just to get rid of that faceting pattern. Okay, and once we have it smoothed out a little bit, I'll activate stabilize stroke on my draw sharp brush, and I'll go over the rim of the collar, and it will create a much smoother stroke. And if you can't tell in the video, you're able to get a lot more control out of this while you're using your tablet when you have stabilize stroke activated. So that's one major benefit. Okay, so next we're going to start sculpting out some cloth and wrinkle forms. Now, you are welcome to go ahead and experiment with the cloth brush all you want, but I wasn't finding a whole lot of practical applications for it in this case. Plus, I'm just a little bit more used to sculpting my own cloth wrinkle forms myself, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so I'm going to use Draw Sharp, which of course kind of quickly turns into one of my favorite brushes, and I am going to turn symmetry off because of course wrinkle and cloth forms will not be symmetrical across your model. Okay, so from here I'm going to use the alternate function of the Draw Sharp brush by holding Control, which will build up a sharp crease line. And this sharp crease line is a good foundation to start creating our wrinkle forms. So I'll do a few of these large crease lines going across the chest or areas where I feel the cloth might stretch against the body. I'll also do a few lines using the regular subtractive form of the Draw Sharp brush against a few of the larger creases that I've already built out. My thought process with this is to basically create the built-out crease lines where the cloth is stretching against the body, and then using the subtractive function of the Draw Sharp brush to create a few indentations where gravity might be affecting the cloth the most. Now, don't quote me on this. Certainly go find your own reference and make your own determination of what is the best way to sculpt cloth. Your main considerations when sculpting cloth is how the fabric is affected by the density of the mass that is underneath. But as I'm steadily creating something I'm more happy with, I'll use the pinch brush to tighten up some of the wrinkles, as well as using the smooth brush to fade out the creases at the ends. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on refinement here, and then in the next part we're going to start talking about how to use masking tools and face sets. Okay, so now that we got our little turtleneck shirt thing created here, I'm going to show you some of the stuff that you can do with masking and face sets. So from our sculpt tools, I'm going to select the mask brush, and I am just going to mask off our guy's collar right here. Also, I have symmetry re-enabled, so it's covering both sides. And I am just going to do a quick sloppy coverage of the entire collar area. Okay, that's gonna work. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go up to our mask menu in the top toolbar here, and I'm gonna go to Sharpen Mask. And it got rid of that blurry edge around the whole area where we drew in our mask. Now we can see a little bit of an area where we didn't cover with masking, and we can see some areas where we got some bleed over. So I'm just gonna hold down Control just to subtract from our masked off area. Okay, and with that, we'll go to Sharpen again just to make sure, and we should be good. So with our collar masked off, if we select our grab brush, you can see we can grab the area of the shirt and the collar won't be affected. And then we can hit Control-I to invert the mask selection, and we can grab the collar and the shirt won't be affected at all. Okay, that's great. Okay, now say we want to save this area of the collar so that we can call it up and just sculpt on this area at a later time. Well, the issue is that once we clear this mask by hitting Alt-M and we keep sculpting, we won't be able to call up that masked area again. So here's what we can do. With this area masked off, we can actually give it a face set. And for anybody coming from ZBrush, face set is essentially Blender's version of polygroups, and they work in pretty much the same fashion. Now, the first thing when you're trying to create a face set you need to know is turn off your Dynatopo, because it does not work when Dynatopo is on. Okay, so next we're going to go to face sets, and we're going to select face set from masked. Okay, now I hit that and it doesn't appear that anything happened. And that's because if we go to our viewport overlays and we go down to the sculpting features, we can see that the checkbox for face sets is unchecked and the visibility is set to 0. So let's bring that up, and now you are able to see the face set you just created. Awesome. Now you also have this face set draw pen, which if you go over areas of your mesh, you can create another face set. And then once you let go and you end that stroke and you start to draw again, you're creating another face set. But if you're in the area of a face set that you've already created and you hold down Control, then you're just going to be expanding that already created face set. So regular strokes, create new face sets, hold down Control to expand the area of the face set you've already started drawing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create some more face sets around here, and I'll show you a little bit of what you can do. So I'll create another face set right here on the back, kind of where a tag area would be. I'll have one maybe going down the front side of the shirt. And just like with the mask brush, if you hold down Control in an area that doesn't have a face set created, you'll just be able to subtract from all the face sets. As where if you hold down Control and you press down in the area of a face set you've already created, then that's going to expand the area. Okay, so we have several face sets created on our character bust. Now, if you go and you look closely, you can see that all of these face sets have these kind of jagged, faceted edges on them. Now, you can actually correct that by going to your mesh filter brush, and then it has several options here. And if we go to relax face sets, and you start brushing pretty much on any face set on your mesh. You don't have to do really a specific area. If we start brushing, you can see it just smoothed out the edges of all the face sets, except for this collar area, which we currently still have masked off. All right, so that's the next thing we'll talk about. We'll talk about masking. Now, if I hover over any one of our face sets and I hit H, it just hid all of our face sets. Okay, now if I click on W and I go to invert visible, we can see all of our face sets. Now, perhaps, I don't need this many face sets. Maybe I want to start merging them together. So we can go to W and face sets from visible. Okay, now that actually just created one face set out of all the face sets we created. Well, you know what? I still kind of wanted to save this collar area on its own. So how do we do that? All right, so I'm going to undo, and if I just tap H in the viewport, we have everything back. Okay, so with everything back, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to hit H once again on our face sets, and it just hit all of our face sets. Next, I'm going to select our box mask tool, and I'm just going to select everything that's still in the viewport. Okay, so all of that has been masked now. Now, if I hit H again in the viewport and bring everything back, you can see that we have the shirt masked and we have the collar masked, and these other face sets that we created are unmasked. So if I go up to our sculpt toolbar, and I really think that this should be in the masking options and not the sculpt options, but if I go into our sculpt options here and I select hide mask, now it hid the shirt, which didn't have a face set, and it hid our masked off collar. Now we just have all these little face sets that we created here. So once again, we can tap on W and go to face sets from visible. Now all these little bits here have one face set. So H to bring everything back. Okay, now doing that, as you can see, gave us some sort of little bit of garble around the edges of where we isolated our face sets. Okay, so no big deal. I'll show you how to correct this. All right, so we are just going to go in and we are going to hide these little edges here. So we've just selected that little edge of garbled geometry, and we're going to hit B and select all of it. Then we'll hit H again, and we'll select the next edge. B to mask all of it, bring everything back to visible. And we'll do it with our big face set group here. Okay, so with all of that selected, first we'll go to our mask options and we'll select sharpen mask. Then we'll go to hide masked area, tap W, invert visible, and it's going to grab a little bit of extra geometry from around the edge of where we masked off, but that's okay for what we're doing. And I am just going to tap W and select face set from visible. Okay, so now that we have our one face set created, I'm going to hit Alt M to clear the mask. And with any brush selected, if you hit the checkbox next to face sets, you'll see that your brush stroke will automatically be masked to the area of the face set you start drawing in. Now, this also applies if you start drawing outside of the area of a face set. The face sets will essentially be masked off to any effect of your brush. And as soon as we uncheck face sets in the brush settings, you'll see that the masking of the brush stroke is completely removed. Okay, so let's start sculpting with these face sets a little bit. Okay, so once again, I'm going to use the mesh filter brush just to relax the face set edges here. And then I'm going to select something like, let's try our inflate brush, and we'll make sure that this has face sets enabled. And I'm just going to lightly brush over all of these really quick right here. And that works pretty good. Okay, so then if I just smooth out and inflate again, it kind of adds a little bit of an appearance of just adding some cloth padding onto our bust. And once again, if I disable face sets, I'm just going to smooth out the edges a little bit where I don't want such a sharp transition, mainly back here around the tag area. And once you've decided that you're good, you don't want to be utilizing the face sets for now, you can go back into your viewport overlay settings and just either disable the check mark or turn the visibility down to 0. I will say that one caveat to using face sets is that you can't use them at all in conjunction with Dynatopo, and as soon as you turn on Dynatopo, it will erase your face sets. You can use your remesh settings if you select to preserve your face sets, but I've found that there are still some stability issues, especially with the earlier versions of Blender. But the sculpting features in Blender are constantly growing, improving, and becoming more stable. And I'd like to thank Pablo Ibarro for helping to improve these features and turn Blender into the fully fleshed out sculpting program that it is. And with that, it is going to be a continued process of refinement as I add in some more creases, seams, and wrinkle details using the techniques I showed earlier in the video. From time to time, I'll use the face sets to call out and focus on an individual area so that I can sculpt on that alone. From here, I'll be leaving you with a brief time lapse until the end of the video, so feel free to skip ahead and see the finished results. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I hope you found something useful. If you did, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon to receive a notification whenever I post another video. So until the next one, keep working and get those projects done.